discussion of the commission direction and historic preservation review process.
Yes, in your packet, I included a copy of the mayor's proposal for how he would like for the historic preservation review process to proceed. And that was approved at Monday's city commission meeting. So we have our marching orders, and we need to get it scheduled because the timeline needs to move along rather briskly. But what I would like to do, and where I can certainly engage the board's help, I'll be going through and comparing this list with what's been demolished over the last 12 years. But this was essentially a windshield survey, so that if a property was not readily visible from the public right-of-way, it was not included on this survey. And it wouldn't have been included on the 1986 survey that preceded this. So if there are properties that you're aware of that you don't see on this inventory list, and I've become aware of a couple that simply were lovely estates hidden away, so they weren't included. We will also make any additions where we find an important property that simply wasn't included in this. There might be some updates about addresses. We've had some lot splits that might have affected addresses. So we'll tidy up the inventory and make sure we have a good data collection of what we have. Another request that is part of the work is to do a little comparing with some other agencies in terms of what their ordinance consists of. Doing a little compare and contrast, how effective those ordinances might be. You know, are they effective? Are they achieving the preservation of historic resources, or do they have an ordinance and really nothing has happened? So we'll do some comparing with that, and I'll be bringing that back to the board as well, so that you all can see. And I know some of this was done. I think we looked at some of the cities back when we were reviewing the ordinance the year before last. And if there are some other cities that could be added to the list, these were some that the mayor had suggested. There may be some other cities that are also might offer a good model, and or we might look and say, yeah, we're pretty much on track with what a lot of other cities are doing. But we'll need to do that. We'll also need to, again, like I said, benchmark some of the success rates. Are they, you know, when we look at a city's ordinance, have they actually done what they were supposed to do? Do they feel like, okay, our historic resources are pretty much covered, or is it still a work in progress as we are? The city commission also wanted to learn a little bit about some private preservation efforts that might be going on in the city. This might be Casa Feliz, could be the Palachik Museum, which is located in National Register property. So we'll do a little reaching out and see what those folks that have wonderful collections of historic resources are doing for those, strictly with the private, strictly on the private level. And I'll be reaching out to a couple good consultants to talk about to bring a fresh set of eyes up to our updated list of historic resources. And again, we're going to be soliciting public input at this meeting and every meeting, as we always would, about any appropriate amendments to the historic preservation ordinance as written today. If there's any additional incentives that we can offer our owners of historic homes. Because again, the goal is historic preservation. How can we make that happen in a positive way? Couple boards that we'll be coordinating with will be the Economic Development Advisory Board. Again, I've got presentations already made and updated with the latest economic development figures in terms of what historic preservation brings to the state. So we do have that information available for them to take to the Economic Development Advisory Board. And you all may remember that when the Downtown Historic District was listed on the National Register, it was primarily so that those businesses could take advantage of the federal tax credit program as they renovate the buildings to encourage reinvestment in our downtown core. So we'll be, once again, reminding the Economic Development Board about that potential. And any ordinance changes or no changes, we'll take back to the Planning and Zoning Board so that we have their comments on it. And all of this work needs to be completed, the goal is to complete by October 15th. So this board will be busy. However, on the bright side, you all have spent a lot of time reviewing the ordinance in the past. So certainly the housekeeping amendments that you all have wanted to make for clarification are already drafted, and you can take a hard look at any other policies that you improved and make those recommendations. So those are pretty much our marching orders. I think that's my last slide.
And how was this, how did we receive this directive?
This is from the city commission.
The meeting on Monday?
The meeting on Monday evening adopted the mayor's draft that you have before you. So
Right.
those are the marching orders per se. Again, the board will be welcoming public comment, any special meetings and regular meetings, I'll make sure are on the internet so that we can have people come and comment about the state of historic preservation of Winter Park, so that the board can include those comments in the deliberations.
Before we do that, I have a few questions. I don't know if anybody else has some questions.
I had a couple of questions as well. That was,
Yeah, first of all, on this section 7 and section 8, on the list that you gave us, so section 8 is newly identified?
Yes, that was newly identified in 2001. In 1986, there was a survey that looked at buildings built from the birth of Winter Park through 1930. And a couple buildings after that date were included. For example, Casa Feliz was included because they thought, even though it's in the 1930s, it wasn't really the target decade they were looking at. They knew they had some important buildings from the 30s. So that was an example of one they included from the 30s in 1986. And then in 2001, we took the 70s survey and the 1986 survey and updated it to include buildings through 1950. Because the program is typically to look back 50 years and see what you have. So what you have before you was based on collections that were made in 2001, primarily buildings built before 1950. And again, there were some omissions.
Okay, so the only qualification to appear on this list is age?
It is age. It is, do they still look like their historic selves, and that was the determination the consultant made. And they also look at, is it related to architecture, either by an important architect, by an important builder? Does it represent a vernacular style, that is a homegrown style? You know, is it local material, something of interest? Or is it associated with an important person? Or is it associated with a pattern of development, like, you know, Orwood Manor? That's a pattern of development as well as some nice architecture. But, you know, the pattern of development was a land boom subdivision. So they look for age, integrity, plus something else.
So these have been sorted through. It's not strictly age.
No.
and I was going to say, both of these surveys were done by, I guess, staff and a consultant, or were they done by consultants?
The
or-
consultant was pretty much turned loose, and then they report back to
Or
the city. There
The
wasn't a
city.
board
Actually,
at
it
the
wasn't a
time,
board when
right,
these were done.
right.
So effectively, these were done by professional. I mean, the identification here was done by professionals in the field of historic preservation and history, architectural history or whatever.
Correct. This was done by GAI, and they had an architectural historian do the field work.
Okay. And the other thing, schedule, I mean, I'm looking at this one here, for us to be complete or substantially complete by October 15th for the city commission, and the requirement for review by Economic Development Advisory Board, and Planning and Zoning Board. I mean, we're talking about P&Z Board is probably gonna be in the first week of October, the first full week of October, and so we're
Yes.
taking a week off of that, so we're maybe around the 7th or so, 7th or 8th.
Yes, the October planning and zoning meeting is on the 2nd,
On the 2nd.
on October 2nd.
So we would
I'm
have
sorry,
to-
October 1st, Tuesday.
So
October
material would
1st.
have to be into them at least a week prior to that, is that correct? For inclusion in their packets.
That's correct.
And, okay. So now we're into September, so. Effectively.
It's tight.
Yeah.
Lindsay, I have another question. On this, as I look at this list, I can't tell which of these homes or properties have voluntarily entered our program at Winter Park, in Winter Park.
Yeah, we can make that note.
I think that would
As I'm
be-
doing,
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be.
As I'm doing the update, I can also highlight those that are have either been individually designated since the ordinance was first established, or is on this list as a historic resource and is in the College Quarter or Virginia Heights, for example. Because one of the line items, of course, is to do a little, to update the commission with the numbers, how many resources we have, how many have been designated or in a local designated district and thus have.
And those would be two different designations. One would be they had chosen to come in their own individual property. And the second would be they were included
They're
in
part
an
of the
overall
district.
vote. They're two different
Mhm.
kinds of things, but I think that would be of interest to all of us to see how that happens. The other thing that I think the city commission would be interested in, and those who are, avid preservationists, would be how the program is prospering under this board. In other words, we come in here every month and a home that is listed wants to do something, wants to change something, and so, a before and after pictures, just something to take them through. The program is very vital and very, again, through people's individual choice, that it's very vital when things are going on and things are happening. And I don't find that being talked about, and I think that that's information that the citizens and the elected officials would like to have.
Absolutely, because
We've got
we
it.
have a nice collection of before and after photos that I
Right.
use in my little presentations and, sad little battered house and then what it looks like.
Right. I think that speaks well of how we spend our time and, the interest and concern and the assistance available to people who want to do that. The last thing, and this is kind of, everybody's been kind of silent on it, but I'm hoping in this process, we as a board have an opportunity to go back and review the specific designation that kind of ignited this. Because as a board member, I was shocked to find the actual details of that property. After we had designated, I was shocked. And I just think that something like that needs to be addressed and reviewed. And we need to be able to comment, and we certainly need to be able to correct so that something like that never happens again.
And that can be part of any ordinance amendments that this board might want to recommend, would be making that clear in the ordinance that you implement, what the process should be. If there is any question about a property.
Demolition or with,
Designation.
Demolition is covered in the ordinance, a process, the criteria to consider. But some things have come up that have never come up before. And I think it would be helpful for the board to have that process clarified so that citywide, all the departments understand what that process should be.
Well, I speaking for myself and from the actions that I've seen of my fellow board members, I mean, this is a process we love. We love the program, we love the elements of this in the city of Winter Park. We're happy to donate our time and our passion to help advance that. And to have something like this happen and comments made about us that have been made in public forum are shocking to me and unacceptable. And I would like the opportunity to go back and redress that so that the full facts are known. And we will not be subject to something like that again as citizen volunteers.
I think in a prior meeting, we had discussed tweaking the application process, some of the language on the bottom of the signature, where the signature of the applicant is set forth on the form, that would help avoid that type of problem in the future. And I can't remember which meeting it was. I'm not sure, Jenny, if you were here that time, but we did talk about some proposed recommendation language for our application form, and I'll go back and maybe by the next time we all meet, I'll see if I can find my notes and if you all could do the same thing, because I think that ties into Janine's points that you just raised. And I think your request of identification of properties that are currently designated for in the historical district on our list is very important. That'll help us. And that's a nice reference point for this board going forward after this process is done. You know, if we each had our own little manual, maybe in a notebook, we could have this manual with the relevant ordinance handy, the national ordinance, and use it as a reference tool. So I think you made some very valid points.
After being on the board for several years now and going through the process of rewriting the ordinances, of which we thought we were just about completed, really, until this instance has come up. You know, the white elephant in the room here, since the Cape End House came up. You know, I think we're really going to have our work cut out to go back through the ordinance and really rewrite those codes so that they're extremely clear. But that doesn't give us much time, as Randall was looking at the calendar, because that took us, how long did it take us to review the original one so far? Maybe a year or two? Yeah.
I think it spent a good year in review.
I mean,
And I
Because
think all those amendments that you have in draft form are all still
valid.
Right,
They have been deemed valid by this board as a positive recommendation. I suspect you will want to go a little deeper, given the direction at this point.
I think it's pretty obvious that things have to be spelled out much more clearly from this point on, and I think getting that in front of the commission by the 15th it's going to be a lot of work for us, just seeing, you know, how long it took to get through the ordinances that we already reviewed. So I'm thinking we probably have to get on the calendar several working meetings, because that's going to take a while and it'll have to be reviewed, because we obviously have seen that there's some serious kind of holes or gaps in the ordinance.
And you want the opportunity to take public input from the citizens as well.
Right.
I
So-
think it's a good idea to have the evening meetings as well, with Candace's comments, because by holding the evening meetings, we would have allowed more public interchange, you know, exchange with the proposed changes, and I'd like to have enough notice time set aside so that the public can see what we're thinking about doing. And to do that, we need to start scheduling our meetings rather quickly.
I'm gonna say, everything being said is wonderful. The one issue that we have, I mean, effectively, everything in the city of Winter Park with regard to historic preservation at this point is pretty much voluntary. It's a voluntary process. I mean, we volunteer our time here, but the property owners who choose or do not choose to have their properties communities that may be considered a historic resource, included or not included, in a district, or for that matter, individually, is voluntary. I think in one case, that, everything is property owners, unlike, I won't say a vast majority, but a majority of the communities in the state of Florida, the designation of an individual property in the city of Winter Park cannot be made without the property owner's approval. So, I mean, we have to take everything into account with the understanding that we can tune the ordinance and we can do all this other stuff. But you need to have somebody come up and say they want their property designated. I mean, the alternative, of course, is a historic district, but then there's a very heavy and high threshold as to how you can create a historic district. And as we found when we endeavored to make some modifications to the ordinance to, while not reduce, but not still have a high threshold, but to reduce the intensity of the threshold, that was not met with a whole lot of, should I say, positive input or response from the aspects of the community. So, I just want to make everybody understand that we can really tune this thing up pretty well and do best practices and everything else based on major communities throughout the state and the country. If people don't volunteer to have their properties put on the local historic register, we can't force the issue.
And I think that's a very important public information education process, and hopefully it will become even more clear during these public meetings. This board does not have the authority, nor does it seek the authority to take away private property rights of owners. This is a guidance for those who wish to have their properties designated as a historical property. And so, sometimes there's a misperception by the public that, this is a taking of someone's property rights, and it is not at all. It's a reaction to a property owner's request to have this special designation or to modify an existing property in a historical district. So
There are certainly a lot of myths, I think, out there, as we have discovered, and as I hear when I go out in the community, everything from, someone always has some horror tale from some out-of-control historic preservation board in some, mythic community where somehow everything is, examined to the nth degree, or the sense that that somehow something will be taken from them, that your house has to become a museum, or it's going to be on a tour and open to the public. And of course, nothing like that is true. The devaluing property is another myth that there's just evidence about. So this can also be a good opportunity to try and put some of those myths to rest. There's a lot of good information out there. The feedback I get from the folks that have been through our design review process, that have gotten their certificate of review, typically say that was the easiest part of the remodeling they ever experienced, as opposed to meeting that Florida building code and so forth. They say this was the easy part, no charge, easy peasy, here's my design, you get the feedback, and even when the board has had modifications, I think most people acknowledge that it actually sent them in a better direction than where they were originally heading. So the feedback I've had from the folks that have been through the process, it was just part of the process of getting your addition or your renovation. And certainly the before and after photos show some really positive outcomes. Because of course the best thing you can do for historic buildings is keeping them in use as residences or businesses or whatever they are. Keeping them in use is the best way to preserve a building, because everything can't be a house museum or incorporated into a little faux Williamsburg. So we're a living, breathing community. So it's our historic buildings, which are a really small percent. This looks like a lot, but back in 2001, it was 5% of our commercial buildings and 7% of our residential buildings. And unfortunately now it's probably more like 6% of our residential buildings. But it's a really small number citywide, but it's a really important number because it is the character of the community and something important to look after. But as we see all around the city, they're pretty easy to keep part of the vital community. Looking at the board, let's see, Candace lives in a historic home, Genean does. Mr. Wilson no longer lives in Winter Park, has his business in Winter Park, lives in a historic home in the Orlando Historic District. So you all have that experience of living, breathing places, not museum pieces.
To follow up Christi's comments, I think that, as you say, I live in a historic home, so I have an inordinate awareness of the success rate of historic homes that are put up for sale, designated or not, in our community. And sometimes these historic homes will sit on the will languish on the market for months and months and months. And the way to solve that is for citizens like ourselves who are passionate about it to buy them and to save them. And it's easy, it's simple, and it's delightful to live in some place that has that kind of feeling and that kind of presence. Your bathrooms are this small and your closets are smaller, but there's great, there are great things to be, but most people buy, even those that love historic preservation, end up buying new homes or newer homes. So it really is up to touching people who love this and say, come and participate with us. And that's strictly voluntary, strictly under property rights. You can choose where you're going to live and how that's going to look. So I would encourage anyone who feels so strongly about it to do that and to participate, become an owner.
We've had a couple recent sales. You all may remember 1005 Lakeview Drive in the College Quarter, a property that had the very contentious proposed addition. The owner that had the approval sold the house. The house had some repairs and renovations, termite treatment, and it was just sold again. I just got a phone call from a new owner asking how he could designate it, and I said, well, you're already in the historic district. Welcome to the College Quarter. So it was just sold at a profit. And another house that the board approved in addition to, also in the College Quarter and also on the lake, was just sold after the owners had had it for 2 years and were transferred. And I think it was sold within 30 days. The 1005 Lakeview was sold so fast I didn't know it was on the market. It didn't have a sign up. So there is a demand for character properties. As you said, they do have storage issues sometimes, but they are character properties, and I guess location plus a nice historic home, it can sell quite quickly.
What I was sort of getting to is we can look at some stuff specifically, but if we could also look statewide, globally, as to how many communities have ordinances and sort of just key aspects of the ordinances that they have. I mean, whether or not they offer tax incentives for renovation, whether who can recommend a property for designation. I mean, that's because I think in one of our earlier conversations with the board, you mentioned that said before, you were commenting on how so many people feel if your property's been designated, you know, there's all these onerous requirements for the property. On the flip side, there's a lot of feeling out there that the city can designate a property because it's such a historic resource, but if the property owner, and the way the ordinance is written in Winter Park is, the property owner doesn't agree, it's not gonna happen,
That's correct.
with the exception of a historic district. And the property owner could be in a building that is a significant resource in that district, and he could vote against it, but if he's in the minority and they've met the 67% threshold, then that property will be treated as if it were an individually designated property effectively.
That all comes to
So,
say.
you know, I mean, I think we have to have all the tools that are out there on the table and present them so the commission understands what's possible, what's not possible. And I mean, I think that's something that they need to know.
Yeah, and I think we're all, you know, painfully aware of that at this point. You know, I think we're at a crossroads. You know, it's scary to think that there's 6% of the homes, you know, that are historical, that really define the character of the town, and that's a very rare resource that needs to be protected. And right now, you know, the way the ordinance and the codes are written, there really isn't that much protection. And I think we're at a crossroads where when we look at those ordinances and the codes and compare them to the processes in other like cities, that we may need to make some hard decisions that may have to do with the best interests of the town, the city, the character, and balancing that with the property owner's rights at the same time.
Lindsay, I was going to ask, when staff is working on the compilation of ordinances from other cities, as you come across incentives for making changes to property or having them designated, or any of the incentives that might be built into those ordinances, would you either highlight those or tab those and identify the city and also the language that is used for their particular incentive? Because when we're working on our drafting of a recommendation, we might want to adopt some of the incentives that seem to be working in other cities.
Certainly.
Randall, I would like to request that these meetings begin with the timeline review of the Cape
Where we
House,
are.
so that the complete facts are available to ourselves and to the public, and how this process was misused, and what we need to do to, you know, that lays the groundwork for what we're going to do moving forward.
I would like to make a suggestion to tweak that a little bit. We have a lot of work to do between now and October 15th, and the history of that matter took place when we were not involved. And I just don't want to get bogged down into something a prior board did with regard to that
I'm more
issue.
particularly concerned about what happened before this board. We're
That's
all
what I'm
here.
talking about.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too bogged down in what another board did and what happened and where we are historically. I don't want to waste too much time on that, because we've got so much work right now that the city commission has charged us with to have done by October.
Right.
So my personal preference would be to go back and visit that later. That's okay, but I just don't want to waste too much time, because we spent hours and hours working on these ordinances, the reviews, and I just want to make sure we focus on going forward rather than
In responding.
repeating
Yeah.
historically what happened with another board and another set of circumstances. But I understand.
I should have been more
Okay.
specific
Okay.
about what happened before this board, because I think all of us, you might be the possible exception over here for that designation.
I wasn't here.
Well,
Were you here?
let's just say that it's a very active interest in our community. There's quite a bit of information. quite a bit of talk, and I think that the facts become very powerful, just as laying this is how, this is how this exploded.
Yeah, I think a timeline's fine, but I just, you know what I mean, I don't want to
Oh, I
spend.
understand.
I don't think a discussion,
more than-
I don't think a discussion is really gonna be necessary with regard to that. I just think a summary of what happened. I think it's a 5 to 10 minute little blurb.
As long
And
as we don't, just, we got a lot
Obsess
of
over
work
it,
to
yeah.
do, and I'm all for moving forward with our charge right now. And I don't mind, discussing where we came from to get to the point to have this charge before this board. But I just think our time would be better spent, let's move forward. That's just my recommendation.
You're an attorney, what is it called, where you stipulate facts? You agree to, these are the stipulated
I
facts?
can't stipulate because
happy-
I wasn't here, so
Well,
I'll listen to what you all
I'm
have to
talking
say.
about this, the most recent, the designation that we made, that we were requested, that was
Yeah, I
requested
wasn't
of us
here,
and that we were.
but I'll
and that
certainly
we
listen
made.
to your
And I think that
recitation.
that's a great starting point, as to, anyway, I think that's an important part to kind of quiet the waters on this and make it factual and what you say about the matters at hand.
And the next item on here is a proposed temporary demolition moratorium.
This is on the agenda, Mrs. Chemtob's request. Along with the review process, there was the concern that there might be a rush to demolition, or until there's been time for this board to review the process, that there might be a desire to recommend a temporary moratorium on demolition. And typically moratoriums, we still have an attorney on the board, need to be for a very specific purpose and for a very specific time period, so as not to overly burden property owners. And in this case, it might be a time period that would allow this board to complete their deliberations and report any needed ordinance amendments to the city, and might apply to a very limited category of properties, which might be properties already identified on the Florida Master Site File, or properties over a certain age, 50 or 60 years, something of that nature, so as to minimize any problems that might arise from this. But that is something for the board to discuss if you want to recommend that action to the city commission during your period of deliberations before you return to the city commission with your final recommendations. This would not affect any property that already has an existing application. For clarification,
Oh, yeah.
anyone who has an active permit in process would be excused from this.
Well, I brought this up with Lindsay, because I think, it's out there, in the community, and I think we all know, like we have just discussed, that the ordinances do not address all of the important situations that can come up with historical resources. And I think at this time, while we're charged by the city commission to come up with a revised set of ordinances that will address some of the issues, that I think that, at this point, we're really at a crossroads. I think something needs to be done. And in the meantime, until these ordinances are rewritten and approved by the city commission, I think that we should have a moratorium on the demolition of, and we can decide as a board, is it 50 years, is it 75 years, are they on a particular list? But I think at this point, we as a board have to protect these rare resources which are dwindling in numbers until the ordinances are approved.
I just had clearly that's gonna, what's happening, I mean, right now we can deal with demolitions on designated properties or properties in historic districts. I mean, that's where our,
That's correct.
that's where the ordinance allows us to have review and say. Clearly, one of the items that may come up is, as in other communities, while a property may not be designated, but because of its a certain age and such, that it's, that a review by the Historic Preservation Board or be made of any potential demolitions for non-designated properties, probably at a lower threshold or a lower time frame. But the question I have is, you know, what designates a demolition? I mean, that a moratorium would affect. I'm thinking of there's a house on Palmer that was not necessarily, by any stretch of the imagination, something that would be designated, but as a case in point, there's a house on Palmer near one of the.
Near me.
Pardon?
Near me, it's right across
Yeah.
the street from me.
And, you know, they basically demolished 90% of the house, but they saved some of the house. So it's not a pure demolition. You know, it's a demolition for renovation, but it was selected, it was technically selective demolition. Well, you know, are we gonna do that as well? And if that's the case, that could, you know, I think it's something that could be maybe mentioned to the commission to consider, but I don't know at what level we're talking about. I mean, that could throw a wrench into, you know, if you say, you know, if the city or the building department considers any kind of demolition being,
It's usually noted on the permit if it's partial or if it just says demolition, it's to the
Yeah.
foundation. If it's partial, someone taking off a previous addition to replace it, for example, that's usually noted on the permit application. I think this was referring to the total demolition, or more than 50%. There could be a threshold, but it would be important to limit it in terms of scope, and again, put a time frame on it that wouldn't be burdensome. You know, anything over a year, then you're talking, that's more a major moratorium for a major ordinance rewrite. We don't have that situation before us here. There's a pretty finite time limit that wouldn't be unduly burdensome. And again, if the board wishes to consider that, it does need to be to a limited category of property. You know, all the demolition permits cross my desk for my signature, so I can make sure that they're not a designated property or in a historic district. And I see a number of properties that I sign off on regularly that are not and never would be historic resources, and those should not be held up, you know, on their timeline. But, so if the board wishes to consider this, again, it would need to be time limited and targeted to a specific category of property.
I would suggest we put it on our list of topics to discuss in the future and perhaps get some feedback from the city attorney as to the parameters for narrowly defining it. Verify that this board has the jurisdiction to make this recommendation. And again, while you're looking through other ordinances of other cities, if you happen to come across something that might be reasonably related, to tab it so we can take a look at their language.
You know, because in any case, it would have to be formalized by the city commission.
Correct.
and 2 readings will language, correct?
And it's another topic, it would be great to get some public feedback on that. You know, without getting bogged down and spending our entire evening on that one topic, I would like to put that on the list of topics that we would be providing notice to the public, so that, you know, we can get some, you know, perhaps constructive criticism, you know, positive feedback, whatever it might be. So we always have to be very careful about property rights and entitlement to use the property as one plans to use it when we acquire it.
Certainly.
I would say as the owner of the property that would be on that list, however you compiled it, it sends to me a chilling effect that someone has removed from me my right to choose on property. And I think that that's the kind of thing that can create concern about historic preservation. And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to build a strong base for historic preservation with significant buy-in across the community. And so I would not support that. But I'd welcome hearing other information, but right today, if I was to vote on it, I would not support
I think that's consistent with what we've been talking about too. I'm glad you chimed in, Janine. You know, it's the entire topic that we're discussing for working on our recommendation really is a property rights issue, the perception that the board's trying to take away property rights, which they are not. The whole purpose here is to provide parameters for people who truly desire to protect the historical nature of their residence. And that's why, you know, I said a few minutes ago, I think it's important perhaps to come up with some great, easy-to-read educational plan that says, you know, this board is here to help you modify historical residence. We're not here to force you to create a historical residence. And the fact that it is voluntary, you know, as we've all commented upon that, I think these public sessions might be a great opportunity to educate and to enforce, you know, the beliefs that this board is upon which it's founded, the ordinances. And I think as we have our work sessions, we can further define that.
Well, we're certainly on a fast track in
We
any
are.
case to come up with some recommendations.
And I think the incentives are really very important. You know, if this board can make a recommendation that tax incentives be provided perhaps for homeowners who want to renovate historical homes, I think that's a great option. I don't know how much the city has utilized that option in the past, but it certainly might be something to think about going forward.
And the state does have a program that permits that for major renovations. That it is something that the state allows cities to adopt, and it is in our ordinance. So for major renovations, there are some benefits that we can offer. And there may be others, and hopefully we'll discover a few more carrots to build into the ordinance as well. I've seen some interesting things in my initial review of some other cities. So we want to put all of those reasonable carrots forward as a recommendation, and things that shouldn't be burdensome for the city, because you know, if you've all been watching the budget process, we still have some lean times ahead of us. So, but nothing we've done in terms of our incentives would make a dent in the city budget in terms of lowering our income. So I think we're in good standing. If you've completed your discussion at some point, it's not formally listed on our agenda, but certainly if you want to open for public comment from anyone from the public that may wish to speak.
We will open it up to the public for any comments on any of the items discussed and/or any other items. Come up and provide your name and address.
Good morning. My name is Linda Coolman. I live at Canton Avenue, 257 Canton, and I'm here as the president of the Winter Park Historical Association. And I wanted to thank you all for your service, because I know that you've been under pressure. We have too, for a rather surprising event that occurred, and so you were not alone in being caught off guard with the Capen House situation. I did want to suggest that one thing I think sometimes when we talk about properties that we forget about with historic properties. We are losing these resources, and the charm that these homes add are intrinsic to living in this community. And not only are the people who own historic homes concerned, but the people who own other homes, because they realize the value of their homes will be decreased as these resources are lost, from a visual point of view and from an economic point of view. I realize that there's a property rights issue, and I respect it, but I also hope that you take into consideration what other communities are doing, communities that don't have as their motto the city of culture and heritage, and see how they're preventing this type of demolition. Just quickly, I wanted to suggest that possibly celebrating historic designations and possibly having some kind of celebration of concerning the neighborhoods that are designated might bring real positive attention. And either by an event or by lighting these areas on a certain night, some kind of good publicity that could promote the event, but also promote the reason why it's important and how easy it is to become historically designated and take the fear out of it. Thank you very much.
I'm Clardy Malugin, the former owner of the Cape and Home, and I want to tell you, I want to thank you for all you do. And I was told by one of the commissioners that my input was not an issue at all, and that I wasn't even in the conversation when the decision was made. I feel very strongly that I need to tell you myself the story of the designation. In 2006, I bought the Cape and Home, my beloved home that I adored, that I spoke with Lindsay Hayes immediately about putting it on the registry. It happened within weeks. In fact, I think I was speaking to her before I bought the home. I applied for the historic designation almost immediately, and following their research, the historic board, I don't know if some of you remember, I know Tom McMackin was, but they approved the recommendation, and it was held to go to the city commission. At that point, we needed a variance for a garage that we were building, and because of some issues with that variance was not approved. At that point, I decided to wait to put it through, because I was assured by the commission and by Lindsay that it would be put through immediately, since it had already been approved and recommended by the board, that it would be put through and it would be a rubber stamp of the commission to put it through. So there was an issue in the commission meeting that Steve Leary accused me, I was never allowed to speak, of that it was put on and off, and 3 times it was like there was some shenanigans going on with that, and I can assure you there were no shenanigans. I was trying to save the home for Winter Park, and for the future Winter Park. I was totally committed to that. What happened was I went to Steve Feller, and actually George Wiggins assisted us with working on the setbacks, and we ultimately were able to do a garage slightly in a different place. And I then continued with the restoration. I spent an enormous amount of money and tried to make the house so no one would ever tear it down. And I tried to add the things it needed so a buyer would buy it in the future whenever I did have to sell it. What happened was that my own life got a little complicated. My mother got ill, she had a stroke, I became her caretaker, and also my financial issues, which are now spread all over the media, were an issue. But I can assure you, and I've spoken to 5 different attorneys, I had full ownership when I came back before the board in 2011. And the board acted properly in giving me the designation. There were no issues whatsoever, in spite of what SunTrust wants everyone to believe, and in spite of what they are, and their attorneys, Gray Robinson, are putting about me all over the media. They insisted, there was an accusation that I had done this designation for fraudulent reasons, which is absolutely absurd, totally absurd. The other issue that I want you to hear, and again, I am happy to sit down with anyone and tell you this whole story as many times as you want to hear it, but there was no issue with ownership at all. And if you look at the documentation that caused SunTrust to get this thing rescinded, you will find that they don't even accuse anybody of that. They just did that and created this whole story that was not true. It's very difficult. What I went through is just not a good story about what happens to an owner when they designate a property historic. And truly, SunTrust had no right to that property until July of 2012, which was over a year after it was designated. And again, we were in appeal, and they did not have clear title to that property until January of 2013. So this is, my attorney has said the SunTrust allegations are red herrings, that they wanted that house off the registry so they could sell it to that person, and that is the truth. And I am happy to go over this with you, detail by detail, but a citizen of Winter Park who put her heart and soul into saving the Capen House, which is one of our most important assets. It's our city founder. It's on interlock, and it's something everybody passes almost every day. I mean, to not save that is just a crime, and to allow this bank to use, I mean, the codes were not followed. That is the opinion of not all 5, but 3 attorneys looked at the codes and said it was done improperly. So I just wanted to tell you the truth about the designation. There's a much bigger story, of course, but the truth definitely needs to get out, and the truth is not what SunTrust tried to say. So this is a terrible situation, and I appreciate what you guys are doing, but I just hope you will step back and look at the facts, because the facts is what tells this true story. And a bank should not be able to, whatever the situation is, come in and undo a designation that was done a year before they took over ownership. I mean, we're basically saying that anybody can get away with anything if they throw a bunch of documents at somebody. So anyway, thank you, and thank you for what you do. I know that most of you probably feel about these properties like I do, and I'm sorry that my situation also caused this to happen, but I did own that property, and it was properly designated. Thank you.
Nancy Schutz, 2010 Brandywine Drive. As we move forward with what you've been, tasks you've been given, I sort of agree with you that I don't think the commission and Mayor Bradley understood the ramifications of everything he's asking you to do. I don't think there's going to be a problem once you get started and give a summary of what you're planning to do, that this will be extended, because having sat in on what the Tree Preservation Board had to do with looking at that ordinance, which is even bigger than yours, doing something quickly and doing it not right is not the objective here. There isn't a lot of education that needs to happen. I did spend some time looking at the local and historic because I know nothing about preservation. I'll admit I'm not a preservationist. I want my modern facilities. I don't like old or anything. But I am interested in the city. As some of you know, I take on whatever issues that I have a reason for whatever reason. I never cared about trees until the tree thing came up. And I now have a passion on trees, and I'm trying to help us find more money to get rid of the trees that are falling apart every time there's a storm, and replacing them. So my suggestion is that we start with a summary to educate the community. We can put a summary on the city website, maybe even when the city news things comes out. I'm not sure if it comes out in August or September, but a summary, because most people aren't going to take the time that I did and go over all of the details. People are not interested. As I try to educate people on different issues in the city, everybody comes to me and says, well, what's going on? Well, tell me about it. They don't want to read, they don't want to go to meetings, they just want me to tell them the basis of what's going on. So I take that as a charge, for whatever reason, don't ask me why. But educating the public, not on the past. The past is gone. We want to move forward and see what we need to do to protect the areas that need to be protected. Property rights are very important, and I think from what I've heard, that property rights will come first. So we want this balanced, but education is important so that we don't get in the problem we had before with misinformation. And the letters that I wrote to the commissions must have been the only logical ones, because everybody wrote back to me. Even the mayor, after the first meeting, wrote me about 9 or 10 sentences, which he never does, the night of the meeting, because I only listened to it, I didn't attend, explaining what had gone on, because all of you were getting blasted with misinformation. So education is so important as you move forward with your task. And don't be afraid to say, you know, this timeline is ridiculous. Do it right.
Good morning. Lisa Coney, Sandown Street, Winter Park. I also have a business in Winter Park, and I'm completely new to all of this. But I've certainly seen and heard and been involved in the whole Capen House crisis. I personally don't think that any of you had any part in that at all. I think there's a lot of misinformation, and what we have now is an opportunity to prevent that from happening again. I don't think that that happens with the proposed review process. I think that this is great information. It's something that needs to happen. It's probably something that needs to go on a website so that the public can participate and help with the dashboard, drive-by of proposed properties and so forth. But that doesn't fix the problem. The problem is in the processes and in the ordinances, and that's a bigger issue, and that's really where the work is going to have to be done so that we don't become a city of corporate chains and parking garages, which would appear to be the direction that we're heading. I don't know how many people attended the commission meeting, but I thought it important to note that this preservation review process was only favorably voted by 3-2. There was a great deal of discussion about you being given marching orders, because that's generally not how our citizen volunteer boards operate. This should be coming from you to the commission as what you feel you need to be supported in your role and in the protection of our dwindling and so important resources. There was a lot of conversation about these kind of issues coming from you and being from the board to the commission and not top down. So that was not something that was celebrated. I think that anything worth doing is worth doing well. I don't think you guys would be giving of your time and resources so that you can do this, half-assed, excuse me. So I think arbitrary deadlines and arbitrary lists of cities that may or may not really represent our situation is kind of defeating the purpose. I think that you look at a city like Sanford, and I don't want to live in Sanford, I want to live in Winter Park, but I appreciate that they have an entire district and that nothing's happening in that district. And if we had a district of protected properties, not to say that, that there would be a diminishment of personal property rights, and I'm a huge proponent of personal property rights, but you would buy those properties knowing that that was the protection that was extended to them, and you would have a greater role in protecting preservation if within that district, an amazing resource like Capenham had to come to you first. It didn't, you didn't bail the ordinances, and the commission bailed, I believe, in this. So I think that you have to go through this process because it's now been approved 3-2, whether it's what fixes the problem or not. But I think it's completely reasonable for you to come back and say, okay, we're going through the process, but if you want it done right, here's how long it's really going to take. And rather than bending to the political pressure and putting this Band-Aid on it, what we really need to do is X, Y, and Z. And if you've already vetted ordinance changes and amendments that need to be made, let's put the focus on those, because that's really where the protection long-term is going to come from. I also think that as we're strengthening the code, we absolutely have to pay attention to promoting and incentivizing this. You shouldn't be penalized for wanting to preserve the character of this area if there's opportunities to be rewarded for that, to be celebrated for that, whether it's a tax incentive or just some sort of recognition. It's something that could strengthen this process. We moved here, presumably I moved here. My mother brought me here for the charm of the community and the school districts back when I was this big. I stayed here for tree-lined brick roads and historic homes and the charm and character that should be more than a campaign slogan. And as much as I appreciate, being able to get a great meal any time of day, having the focus on being 100% rented, I don't think that we're going to have the same desire for people to make this their home and their community if we're focused on parking garages and firehouses and 100% rented instead of the quality of the buildings and the occupants and the businesses. And we're losing that. 6% is shocking to me. I had no idea. I thought I was living more in a 51% kind of neighborhood. So I think we need to do something to bring that number up, not down. I appreciate all you do. You are not part of the problem, you're part of the solution. Thank you.
Any further comments from the board? Okay. There's nothing else on the agenda. Ms. Lindsay has anything?
That's everything I have.
Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
A second.
The motion is second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
And, 15.